I, Kofi Annan,
solemnly swear to exercise in all loyalty
It is no secret that Kofi Annan from Ghana was the first black African to lead the United Nations as Secretary General. While a student in the United States, he visited America's South at the height of the civil rights movement. He was in need of a haircut. But this being the era where racial segregation was enforced by law, a white barber told him, "I do not cut nigger hair." To which Kofi Annan promptly replied, "I am not a nigger, I am an African." The story, as told in Stanley Meisler's book titled Kofi Annan, ends with him eventually getting his haircut. There are several interesting questions here. Why would Kofi Annan accept a haircut from a racist? Why did he not stand in solidarity with African Americans who at the time were facing lynching, imprisonment, and other forms of violence simply for agitating for their rights? And equally intriguing, on what basis did the racist barber differentiate between African black skin and African American black skin? Is an African not racially black? At a time of racial polarization in the US, what made the haircut possible? We know that white America differentiates between Africans and African Americans. However, the differentiation creates a divide between Africans and African Americans, with Africans acting as a buffer between black and white America. While the reasoning for this is obvious, or rather could be easily understood, why is it that divisions between Africans and African Americans are growing deeper despite efforts to unite them? A happy new year to you and welcome to Reason Africa. A population boom in Africa has long been on the cards, with estimates showing that by 2050, 4 out of every 10 people in the world will be of African descent, zooming past Asia, and for the first time in over 50,000 years, Africa would reclaim its lost position as the most populated continent on the planet. This naturally means that African descent populations around the world, whether African or African mixed, also known as African diaspora, will also grow, and many more countries will have a majority African descent population. While all this is impressive, worldwide African unity is still ridiculously elusive, whether they are in South America, the Caribbean, Africa, or elsewhere. On the continent where Africans are the obvious majority, Africans call themselves Francophone Africa, Lusophone Africa, and Anglophone Africa, in effect categorizing the people of Africa based on who their colonizer was. Speaking as an African, I always find that strange, that African identity is so deeply tied to its oppression. The slave trade not only physically separated African Americans and Africans, but it created a psychological separation as well. At the root of this continued division between the two groups are misconceptions rooted in the narratives that each group has been socialized about themselves as well as each other. African Americans were all but hypnotized to believe that Africa was the dark continent. It became the longest running and most successful propaganda campaign of all time. Africa was presented as the land of primitive savage cannibals who swung around the jungles of Africa naked. The narrative served multiple purposes. It destroyed the self-esteem of the enslaved population by making them believe they were a people with no history or culture, in efforts to erase memories of Africa as much as possible from their consciousness. In fact, many enslaved Africans came to see slavery as a benefit because it took them away from the savagery of Africa and introduced them to civilization. The image and reputation of Africa became so bad at some point that The Economist in the year 2000 labeled Africa the hopeless continent. These depictions of Africa were also used by European slave traders to justify the slave trade by claiming that they were saving the souls of the heathen Africans by taking them away from Africa to be enslaved. This propaganda was so effective that some African Americans began to shun the idea of a connection to Africa, thought poorly of Africa, thought of themselves as more cultured, more Christian, more white and more civilized than Africans, and therefore looked at Africanness as a matter of shame that needed to be avoided. It was tortured into them that they had no relatives in Africa and that they have never themselves been to Africa. Soon, their connection to where they came from in Africa was lost. Many African American freed slaves who were resettled back in Africa, specifically in Liberia, held the view that Africa needed to be civilized. These settlers, known as Americo-Liberians, displayed some of the attitudes of cultural superiority that European colonizers displayed in their dealings with Africans. Ultimately, they formed the elite club of Liberian society, disenfranchising local Liberians, something which formed the basis for the argument that Liberia is the only African nation to have been colonized by African Americans. To this day, there are some African Americans like Jesse Lee Peterson and Kimberly Daniels who became infamous for thanking God for slavery, which took them from Africa's problems. I couldn't help but laugh during research when I saw a clip where Kimberly once said if it wasn't for slavery, she could have been somewhere in Africa worshipping a tree. This negative view of Africa has driven many African Americans to distance themselves from Africans, or African booty scratchers, which is a derogatory term which was used by African Americans for African immigrants. It is said the only thing worse than lack of information is misinformation. Oftentimes, this is what African Americans get in terms of their knowledge of Africa. This mental detachment from Africa is most evident in how African Americans, as descendants of slavery, were forced to abandon the use of African names for Christian names, a very powerful weapon that psychologically disconnected them from any recollection of their African heritage. That's how deep the divisions are between Africans and African Americans. On the other side of this unfortunate coin are Africans who have developed certain misconceptions of their own regarding African Americans. African American history is not taught in schools in Africa. Africans, more often than not, only see and know African Americans as what they are perceived as on television, which obviously leads to misleading stereotypes. This means that Africans are often exposed to some of the very negative images of African Americans as being gangsters, drug dealers, and generally drawn to violence. The divisions, the issues and the tensions between these two groups deepen further, especially as you have more Africans immigrating to the United States. The divisions, not to mention rivalry and suspicion between African Americans and African immigrants, is also a matter of competition for economic resources. A lot of Africans travel to the United States for different reasons. Many times, those who went in search of employment accept low income and entry-level jobs, jobs which African Americans, as being part of the system, would never take up. This raises several questions about the African immigrant experience in America. How do African immigrants negotiate national, ethnic, and racial identities? What is the extent of their knowledge and understanding of race relations in America? How do their interests and agendas converge with and diverge from those of native-born African Americans? What is the level of race consciousness among African immigrants? And what is their level of participation and contributions to the African American activism? The answers to these questions are in a complex historical reality, one in which some African Americans prefer to keep a distance from the African continent, while some African immigrants avoid the subject of racism in America. While African Americans are going through challenges with racism and police brutality, they've been known to wonder if Africans even care. I'm going to say what I assume everyone is thinking. In a perfect world, African nations would slap sanctions on America for its treatment of black people. Instead, African Americans see too many dismissals of their suffering, with insinuations that these kinds of racism only happen to those kinds of blacks. Too many African immigrants believe they are not affected with the threat of police violence. Gullible or not, they believe they are saved somehow by the allure of their foreign accents or their false safety of their refusal to openly condemn American racism. With this understanding, some African Americans always see African immigrants as opportunists who are profiting from their struggles despite not having shared in their pains or experienced racial discriminations like they did. They believe Africans do not share in their ideology and are unwilling to participate in their political and civil rights movements. The divisions that exist today between African Americans and Africans, as well as Caribbean Africans, is that we have misconceptions of each other, which are rooted in ignorance of each other's historical experiences. For example, how many Africans are aware of the role that the African diaspora played in the struggle against colonialism in Africa? And how many African Americans are aware of the influence that Africa's independence had on the civil rights movements in the United States? I don't know about you, but I think the histories and struggles of Africans on both sides of the Atlantic have always been connected to each other. Once all Africans on the continent as well as across the world become aware of this, we can work on bridging this gaping divide. Now, some good news. This channel has lots of more videos that you can watch totally free. So just click here to start the next episode. I think you are really going to like these ones. I also want to thank our great supporters on Patreon, whose generous contributions allow us to keep expanding and creating more high-quality content. If you'd like to help out with the channel, please head over to patreon.com/ReasonAfrica. That's patreon.com/ReasonAfrica. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.